The room was filled with men who could end a life with a single phone call. But the most terrifying thing in that Greenwich ballroom wasn't Don Salvatore Giordano, the man they called the Iron Gavel. It was the silence surrounding his daughter. Sienna sat in the center of the chaos, a beautiful, deaf island in a sea of violent noise. Everyone, senators, hitmen, titans of industry, gave her a 10-foot berth. They were terrified of offending the Don by miscommunicating with the only thing he truly loved. They chose to ignore her rather than risk their lives. Until Clara Hemlock walked in. Clara didn't see a liability. She saw a girl waiting to be heard. And when Clara raised her hands to speak the only language Sienna understood, she didn't just break the silence. She painted a target on her own back. The air in the sprawling Giordano estate smelled of expensive leather, aged scotch, and the metallic tang of fear masked by expensive cologne. This was the annual charity gala for the Giordano Family Trust, a polite fiction that allowed the 5 major crime syndicates of the Eastern Seaboard to converge in neutral territory. Clara Hemlock shouldn't have been there. She was a freelance interpreter, usually found in courtrooms or hospitals, scraping by in a cramped Queen's apartment. But the agency had offered triple her usual rate for a last-minute tuxedo event. No questions asked. She needed the rent money. When she arrived, the security check was more invasive than a visit to Rikers Island. They took her phone, her keys, and scanned her for wires twice. Inside, the ballroom was a spectacle of Gilded Age architecture and modern criminality. Men in $5,000 suits swirled expensive cognac, their low voices discussing shipments that certainly weren't charitable goods. Clara stood near a marble pillar, trying to blend into the drapery. She had been hired in case any international associates needed translation. But so far, the universal language of power and money seemed sufficient. That's when she saw her. In the dead center of the room, seated on an emerald velvet settee, was Sienna Giordano. She was perhaps 22, dressed in a gown of shimmering silver that made her look like a weapon forged from moonlight. She was stunning, with dark, intelligent eyes that darted around the room, absorbing everything. But there was an invisible force field around her. Clara watched as a prominent city councilman approached the area, his laughter booming at someone's joke. As soon as he neared Sienna's line of sight, his posture stiffened. He gave a jerky, uncomfortable nod in her general direction and immediately veered away, like a ship avoiding an iceberg. A waiter dropped a tray near her. The crash was ear-splitting. Half the room jumped for their waistbands. Sienna didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. It was then Clara realized the truth that the rest of the room already knew. The Don's daughter was profoundly deaf. The isolation was palpable. These powerful men, who feared nothing on the streets, were terrified of this young woman. They were terrified of misunderstanding her, of insulting her, of making the wrong gesture in front of her father. Don Salvatore Sal Giordano was watching from a mezzanine balcony, his hawk-like gaze surveying his kingdom. To disrespect his daughter was a death sentence. So, they chose the safer option. They treated her like furniture. Clara felt a familiar ache in her chest. She had grown up with a deaf younger brother. She knew that look of enforced solitude. It wasn't peace. It was a cage. Against every survival instinct screaming in her brain, Clara pushed off the pillar. She navigated through the crowd of made men and their heavily adorned wives. As she approached the settee, the immediate area went quiet. It was a ripple effect. Eyes turned toward the unknown woman in the simple black dress, daring to breach the perimeter. Sienna looked up as Clara entered her space. Her expression was guarded, a practiced mask of indifference she wore like armor. She expected Clara to do what everyone else did, offer an awkward smile, perhaps an exaggerated wave, and retreat. Instead, Clara stopped 3 feet away. She took a breath, made eye contact, and raised her hands. Her movements were fluid and precise. American Sign Language, ASL. Beautiful party, but very loud. Are you bored out of your mind? For a heartbeat, Sienna just stared. The mask slipped. Her eyes widened, losing their hardness, replaced by a flicker of genuine shock. Sienna sat up straighter. Her own hands moved, lightning fast, sharp with repressed energy. You sign? Who are you? Did my father hire you? Clara shook her head, keeping her signs casual, conversational. No, I'm just the hired help for the hearing people who like the sound of their own voices too much. My name is Clara. A genuine, unguarded smile broke across Sienna's face. It transformed her from an ice sculpture into a vibrant young woman. I'm Sienna, and yes, I am incredibly bored. They all look like terrified penguins in those suits. Clara laughed out loud. The sound was startlingly bright in the tense room. Penguins with very expensive watches? They were having a conversation, a real human interaction in the middle of a viper's nest. They didn't notice the room around them completely stop. The background chatter died out. The clinking of glasses ceased. 50 of the most dangerous men on the East Coast were staring at the interpreter who had just made the Don's untouchable daughter laugh. From the mezzanine, Don Salvatore leaned over the railing. His face, usually a roadmap of calculated indifference, was etched with intense curiosity. He gestured with 2 fingers to the man standing in the shadows behind him. Kalen, get down there. Kalen Croft materialized from the gloom. He was Sal Giordano's enforcer, a man whose reputation was whispered in terrified tones from Boston to Miami. He was tall, built like a sleek predator, with eyes the color of frozen sea glass. He moved through the crowd like smoke, the sea of gangsters parting for him instantly. Clara was in the middle of telling Sienna about her cat's affinity for knocking over water glasses when she felt the temperature drop beside her. She stopped signing. Sienna looked past Clara's shoulder, her smile vanishing instantly, replaced by a look of wary recognition. Clara turned. Kalen Croft was standing entirely too close. Up close, he was devastatingly handsome in a brutal, sharp-edged way. He radiated danger the way a furnace radiated heat. He didn't look at Clara. He looked at Sienna. He raised his hand and clumsily signed a single, jerky movement. Okay? Sienna rolled her eyes, a flicker of annoyance returning. She signed back quickly, dismissively. I'm fine, Kalen. She's just talking to me. Something none of you seem capable of. Kalen's jaw tightened. He finally turned his frosty gaze to Clara. It felt like being physically scanned for weaknesses. The Don would like a word, Kalen said. His voice was low, rough like gravel wrapped in velvet. It wasn't a request. Clara's stomach dropped to her shoes. She looked back at Sienna. I have to go, Clara signed, her hands trembling slightly now. It was nice to meet you, Sienna. Sienna reached out and touched Clara's arm, a jolt of human contact. Don't let him scare you, Sienna signed fiercely. He's just a very large guard dog. Kalen huffed, clearly understanding enough to know he was being insulted. He placed a large, warm hand on the small of Clara's back, steering her away from the light and toward the mezzanine stairs. As she was led away to meet the man who controlled the city's underworld, Clara realized 2 things. She had just made a powerful friend in Sienna Giordano, and she had just walked past the point of no return. The staircase leading to the mezzanine felt less like an architectural feature and more like the ascent to a gallows. The plush red carpet swallowed the sound of Clara's heels, but it couldn't dampen the thudding of her heart against her ribs. Caelan Croft didn't push her, but his presence behind her was a physical weight, a wall of heat and potential violence that ensured she wouldn't think about running. At the top of the stairs, heavy mahogany doors were guarded by two men who looked like they were carved from granite. They nodded to Caelan and opened the doors without a word. The office inside was soundproofed. The hum of the party below vanished the moment the doors clicked shut. The room smelled of expensive cigars, old paper, and lemon oil. It was a library of power. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. In the center sat a desk that was wider than Clara's entire kitchen. Behind it sat Salvatore, Sal Giordano. Up close, the iron gavel looked older than he had from the balcony. Deep lines bracketed his mouth, and his hair was a perfect silver mane combed back severely. But his eyes, dark, bead-like, and unblinking, were terrifyingly sharp. He didn't stand up. He didn't smile. He pointed to a leather chair opposite him. "Sit, Miss Hemlock." Clara sat. Her knees were shaking, but she kept her spine straight. "You know my name," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I know everything about everyone who enters this house," Sal said softly. He picked up a file folder from his desk and flipped it open. "Clara Hemlock, age 26, freelance interpreter. You live in a fourth-floor walk-up in Queens. You're behind on rent by 2 months, and you send $1,500 a month to a long-term care facility in upstate New York for a Toby Hemlock." Clara's hands clenched into fists in her lap. The air left her lungs. "My brother," she whispered. "Leave him out of this." Caelan moved from the door to stand by the window, crossing his arms. He was watching her reflection in the glass, his expression unreadable. "I am not threatening your brother, Clara," Sal said, closing the file. "I am merely establishing context. You are desperate. You are talented. And tonight, you did something no one in my organization has managed to do in 5 years." He leaned forward, the leather of his chair creaking. "You made Sienna smile." The vulnerability in his voice was jarring. For a split second, the mob boss vanished, replaced by a father at his wits' end. "She's lonely," Clara said, finding her courage. "She's surrounded by people, yet she's completely alone. It's psychological torture." Caelan shifted by the window, a low growl in his throat. "We protect her." Clara spun in her chair to face the enforcer. "You protect her body. Who protects her mind? You treat her like a porcelain doll that's going to break if you breathe on it wrong. She's a grown woman, and you all act like she's an alien because she can't hear you." Caelan's eyes narrowed, flashing with a dangerous light. He wasn't used to being spoken to like that. Certainly not by the hired help. "I would die for her." "But can you talk to her?" Clara challenged. Silence stretched in the room, heavy and suffocating. Caelan's jaw worked, but he said nothing. He looked away. Sal cleared his throat. "That is the problem, Miss Hemlock. I am a busy man. I have enemies. I cannot learn the language as quickly as she needs. We have hired tutors. Sienna eats them alive. She mocks them, ignores them, or finds ways to terrify them until they quit. But she liked you." Sal opened a drawer and pulled out a checkbook. He uncapped a fountain pen that probably cost more than Clara's car. "I want to hire you, exclusively." Clara blinked. "I have other clients. Court dates, hospitals." "Not anymore," Sal said, writing. "You will be Sienna's companion. You will live here, at the estate. You will interpret for her, accompany her when she leaves the grounds, and, most importantly, you will be her friend. You will report to me if she is in distress or if she plans anything rash." He tore the check out and slid it across the mahogany. Clara looked down. The number made her vision swim. It was enough to cover Toby's facility bills for 3 years. It was enough to pay off her student loans. It was freedom, or it was a bribe. "This is blood money," Clara said, though her hand twitched toward it. "It is protection money," Sal corrected, "for my daughter's happiness, and for your brother's health." Clara looked at Kalen. He was watching her with intense scrutiny, like he was waiting for her to pull a knife. There was no trust there, only suspicion. If she took this job, she would be under his microscope every second of every day. "I have conditions," Clara said, looking back at the Don. Sal raised an eyebrow. "You are in no position to negotiate, but I am amused. Speak." "I am not a spy," Clara said firmly. "I will not report on her personal thoughts or her secrets unless her life is in danger. If she wants to complain about you, I'm not telling you. If she wants to curse out Kalen," she gestured to the brooding figure, "I will translate it accurately, but I won't stop her. I work for her, not you." Sal stared at her for a long, agonizing minute. Then a dry, rasping chuckle escaped his lips. "Agreed," Sal said. "Kalen will handle your security clearance. You move in tomorrow at 0900. Clara took the check. It felt heavy in her hand. "One more thing. Does Sienna want this? Or are you forcing me on her like the others?" "Ask her yourself," Sal said, waving a hand in dismissal. "Kalen, show her out. And Kalen," the enforcer straightened. "Boss?" "If she turns out to be a rat," Sal said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried the weight of a grave, "you know what to do." Kalen didn't look at Sal. He looked dead at Clara, his eyes icy and void of empathy. "I'll handle it personally." The transition to the Giordano estate was less like moving into a home and more like being processed into a high-security facility. The estate, located on the cliffs of Long Island, was a fortress disguised as a mansion. High stone walls topped with electrified wiring surrounded the perimeter. Cameras swiveled on every corner. Men with earpieces and bulging suit jackets patrolled the grounds with Dobermans. Clara arrived in her battered Honda Civic, which looked comically out of place, parked next to the fleet of armored Escalades and Ferraris in the circular driveway. Kalen was waiting for her at the front steps. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo today. He was in tactical gear, black cargo pants, a tight black t-shirt that clung to a road map of muscles, and a shoulder holster housing a handgun. He looked lethal and efficient. "Trunk!" he commanded, not bothering with a "hello." Clara popped the trunk. "Good morning to you too, sunshine." Kalen ignored her. He rifled through her 2 suitcases with professional thoroughness. He checked the lining of her toiletries bag, shook out her books, and even inspected the soles of her shoes. "Clean," he grunted, stepping back. "Leave the car. Valet will take it. Follow me." He led her through the house. By day, the manor was even more intimidating. The corridors were long, lined with portraits of dead men who all looked like they had killed someone before breakfast. The silence was heavy. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a suppressed one. "Here are the rules," Kalen said, walking briskly. Clara had to jog to keep up with his long strides. "Rule 1. You do not enter the West Wing. That is business only. Rule 2. You do not leave the estate without me or a designated detail. Rule 3. No cell phones with GPS. We will provide you with a secure device." He stopped abruptly in front of a heavy oak door on the 2nd floor. He turned to face her, looming over her small frame. The scent of him, gun oil, rain, and clean soap, was distracting. "Rule 4, he said, his voice dropping an octave. "You don't hurt her. Emotionally, physically, psychologically. If you make her cry, you deal with me. If you sell her out to the press, you deal with me. If you are anything other than perfect for her, you deal with me." Clara looked up at him, refusing to shrink away. "You care about her a lot for a payroll employee." Kaylin's eyes flashed. "She's not a job, she's family." "Then stop treating her like a prisoner," Clara shot back. She pushed past him and knocked on the door. There was no answer, obviously. Clara opened it and walked in. Sienna's room was a revelation. Unlike the dark, heavy aesthetic of the rest of the house, this room was an explosion of color and light. The walls were covered in canvases, paintings of abstract, chaotic emotions, splashes of red, violent blues and deep blacks. Sienna was sitting on the floor, surrounded by speakers. She had her hand pressed against the mesh of a massive subwoofer. The bass was vibrating the floorboards, a rhythmic thumping that Clara could feel in her teeth. Clara walked into Sienna's line of sight and waved. Sienna jumped, then scowled when she saw Kaylin hovering in the doorway. She stood up, wearing ripped jeans and a band t-shirt, looking far more like a rebellious 22-year-old than the Mafia princess from the gala. "He's still here," Sienna signed, jerking a thumb at Kaylin. Clara smiled and signed back. "He's making sure I don't steal the silverware. Or you." Sienna snorted. She looked at Kaylin and signed aggressively. "Get out. Girl talk. No guns allowed." Kaylin sighed, looking at Clara. "What did she say?" "She politely requested some privacy," Clara lied smoothly. Kaylin looked between them, clearly not believing it. But he stepped back. "I'll be outside the door. If you need anything, scream." He closed the door. As soon as the latch clicked, Sienna's demeanor changed. She rushed over to Clara, grabbing her hands. The desperation was back. "You came," Sienna signed. "I thought my father would scare you off, or Kaylin would threaten you until you ran." "They tried," Clara admitted. "But I need the money, and frankly, you seem like you need a friend who doesn't carry a pistol." Sienna walked to her window, looking out at the armed guards patrolling the lawn. "I don't need a friend, Clara. I need an accomplice." Clara froze. "Accomplice for what?" Sienna turned back, her eyes blazing. "I'm not just deaf. I'm not stupid. My father thinks I don't know what he does. He thinks because I can't hear the gunshots, I don't know people are dying. I want out. I want to go to art school in Paris. I have a portfolio. I have money saved, but I can't leave the gates." Clara felt a cold knot in her stomach. This was exactly what Sal had warned her about. "Sienna, if I help you run, Kaylin will actually kill me. No metaphor. He will bury me in the garden." "I don't want to run yet," Sienna clarified. "I just want normalcy. I want to go into the city. I want to go shopping without a motorcade. I want to go to a club. Can you make that happen? Can you convince the watchdog?" Clara thought about Kaylin outside the door. The man was a fortress, but fortresses had cracks. "Baby steps," Clara signed. "Let's survive the first week." The first week was a war of attrition. Clara quickly realized that her job wasn't just interpreting, it was peacekeeping. Sienna was prone to fits of frustration, throwing paintbrushes or smashing plates when the staff misunderstood her orders. Clara became the bridge. She taught the cook the sign for spicy. She taught the maid the sign for leave it alone. And constantly, Kaylin was there. He was a silent shadow. He sat in the corner of the library while Clara interpreted books for Sienna. He stood by the treadmill while they worked out. He ate dinner at the end of the table while Sal was away on business. Clara began to notice things about him. He rarely blinked. He checked the exits of every room he entered, but she also saw how he looked at Sienna, with a protective tenderness that didn't match his brutal reputation. And she felt him watching her. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. There was a heat to his gaze. When she laughed at Sienna's jokes, Kaelin's eyes would linger on her mouth. When she stretched after a long session, his gaze would trace the line of her neck. The tension came to a head on Thursday. Sienna begged to go shopping, not for clothes, but for art supplies in Soho. Sal was in Chicago, so the decision fell to Kaelin. "No," Kaelin said, standing in the kitchen, drinking black coffee. "Why not?" Clara argued. She was leaning against the counter, crossing her arms. "She's been good all week. We can take the armored car. You can bring your goons. Let her pick out her own paint, Kaelin. She's suffocating in here." Kaelin set the mug down hard. "It's not safe. The O'Malley family is making moves in the south. We're on lockdown." "She doesn't know about the O'Malleys," Clara snapped. "She just knows her jailer is saying no again." Kaelin stepped into her personal space. He was so close she could see the flecks of gold in his icy blue eyes. "I am not her jailer. I am the reason she is still breathing. You have been here 5 days, Clara. You don't know the weight of this world. You think this is a game? You think because you learned sign language, you understand what's at stake? I think you use safety as an excuse to control her," Clara whispered, refusing to back down. Her heart was hammering, but not just from fear. The proximity was electric. "And I think you're terrified of what happens if she actually lives a life without you." Kaelin froze. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. The air between them crackled. For a moment, Clara thought he was going to kiss her or strangle her. "Get the car," Kaelin growled, stepping back abruptly. 1 hour. Standard detail. If anything happens, it's on you. The trip to Soho was tense. A convoy of 3 black SUVs moved through the city traffic. Sienna was ecstatic, pressing her face against the tinted glass, signing excitedly about the specific pigments she needed. Inside the art store, Kaelin and 2 other guards formed a perimeter. They looked ridiculous, hulking men in suits standing next to displays of watercolor paper and glitter. Clara stayed close to Sienna, translating her questions to the terrified store clerk. Sienna was vibrant, alive, picking up tubes of oil paint and smelling them, feeling the texture of the canvases. It was going perfectly. Until it wasn't. Clara was holding a basket of brushes when she saw it. Outside the storefront window, across the street, a man in a grey hoodie was talking into his wrist. He wasn't looking at his watch. He was looking at the store. Clara turned to find Kaelin. He was already moving. He had spotted the reflection in a mirror display. Kaelin surged forward, grabbing Sienna by the arm. "We're leaving. Now!" he barked. Sienna yanked her arm back, confused. "I'm not done," she signed angrily. "Move!" Kaelin shouted. He didn't wait for a translation. He scooped Sienna up as if she weighed nothing, shielding her body with his own. "Clara, stay low!" he roared. The front window of the art store shattered. It wasn't a gunshot. It was a brick thrown with force. It crashed into a display of easels. Panic erupted. Customers screamed. Kaelin had his gun drawn in a split second, scanning the street. The other guards formed a wall around Sienna. "Back exit!" Kaelin commanded. He looked back at Clara. She was frozen, glass shards near her feet. Kaelin didn't hesitate. He reached out, grabbed Clara's hand with a grip like iron, and yanked her toward him. "I said move!" They burst out the back alley door, the SUVs screeching around the corner to meet them. They were shoved into the back seat. Sienna, then Clara, then Kaelin, piling in on top of them as the door slammed. "Go! Go!" Kaelin yelled at the driver. As the car peeled away, tires smoking, the adrenaline crash hit. Sienna was shaking, clutching her paints to her chest. Clara was breathing hard, her hand still trapped in Kaelin's. He wasn't looking at the window anymore. He was looking at her, checking her for blood. "Are you hit?" he demanded, his voice rough. "I'm fine," Clara gasped. "Just glass?" Kalen squeezed her hand once, hard before letting go. He looked at Sienna, his expression dark and furious. "That," Kalen said, his voice trembling with rage, "is why I say no." Clara looked at Sienna, who was pale but unhurt. Then she looked at the brick that Kalen had kicked into the footwell. Wrapped around it was a note. Kalen picked it up. He unfolded the paper. Clara read it over his shoulder. It was a single sentence, written in jagged red marker. "The bird can't sing if we cut her throat." Kalen crushed the note in his fist. He looked at Clara, and for the first time, the ice in his eyes melted into something scorching hot. Fear and a shared realization that the game had just changed. "We go back to the estate," Kalen ordered the driver, "and no one leaves, ever again." The estate went from a gilded cage to a maximum security prison overnight. The windows were fitted with steel shutters, the guard rotation doubled, and the atmosphere inside was suffocating. Don Salvatore Giordano was a man who processed fear as rage. For 3 days, the house shook with it. He wasn't yelling. Sal Giordano didn't yell. He spoke in quiet, terrifying whispers that sent his captains scrambling to find the person who threw the brick. Clara felt the weight of the lockdown most acutely in the library, where she and Sienna were essentially quarantined. Sienna was despondent. She sat by the shuttered window, staring at the metal slats, refusing to paint. The incident at the store had broken something in her. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that the violence her father dealt in wasn't abstract. It was a brick through a window. It was Kalen's gun in her face. Clara sat across from her, trying to read, but her eyes kept drifting to the door. Kalen was always there. Since the attack, he had become a permanent fixture. He slept in the hallway outside their suite. He ate standing up. He looked exhausted, the dark circles under his eyes contrasting with the stark pallor of his skin, but his vigilance never wavered. On the 4th night, Clara couldn't take it anymore. She found Kalen in the kitchen at 2 a.m. He was stripping his handgun, cleaning the pieces on the granite island with methodical precision. "You need to sleep," Clara said, stepping into the light. Kalen didn't look up. "I'll sleep when the threat is neutralized." "You're going to hallucinate and shoot the mailman," Clara countered, pulling out a stool and sitting opposite him. "Sal has 500 men. Let one of them take the night watch." Kalen snapped the slide back onto the frame of his weapon with a sharp click. He finally looked at her. "Trust is a limited resource, Clara. The O'Malleys knew exactly where we were. They knew the time. They knew the location. That means there's a leak. Until I find the rat, I don't trust anyone with her safety. Except me." He paused, his gaze softening just a fraction. "And maybe you." Clara felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "I'm just the interpreter." "You didn't run," Kalen observed. "When the glass broke, most civilians would have frozen or bolted. You stayed with her. You shielded her." He stood up and walked around the island. The kitchen was dimly lit, casting long shadows. He stopped in front of her, leaning his hip against the counter. "You need to know how to protect yourself," Kalen said suddenly. "If I go down, you're the last line of defense." "Kalen, I took a self-defense class at the YMCA once. I think I'm unqualified." "Stand up." It wasn't a suggestion. Clara stood. Kalen moved behind her. "The O'Malley foot soldiers aren't looking for a fair fight. They'll grab you from behind. Like this." He wrapped an arm around her neck. Gentle, but the threat of power was there. His body was pressed against her back, a wall of solid muscle. Clara's breath hitched. She could feel the heat radiating off him, smell the soap and gun oil. "Don't pull away," Kalen murmured, his mouth close to her ear. The vibration of his voice went straight down her spine. Drop your weight, chin down, drive your elbow back. Clara tried to focus on the instructions, but her brain was short-circuiting. The intimacy was overwhelming. They were two people existing in a high-pressure vacuum, and the air was getting thin. She dropped her weight and feigned an elbow strike. Kalen caught her arm easily, but he didn't let go. For a moment, they just stood there, his arm across her chest, her back against his chest. "Good," he whispered. He slowly released her. Clara turned around. They were inches apart. Kalen's eyes searched hers, looking for permission or perhaps rejection. His hand twitched at his side, as if he wanted to reach out and touch her face. "Kalen," she breathed. The walkie-talkie on his belt crackled, shattering the moment. "Boss, we found something at the perimeter. You need to see this." Kalen blinked, the soldier mask slamming back into place instantly. He stepped back, the cold distance returning. "Stay in your room, Clara. Lock the door." He turned and strode out into the darkness, leaving Clara shivering in the warm kitchen. The next morning, the tension in the house had shifted from fear to a strange, frantic energy. Sienna was finally painting again. She was working on a canvas that was entirely black and red, slashing the brush against the fabric with angry strokes. Clara was organizing Sienna's art supplies, cleaning up the mess from the previous days. She picked up a box of charcoal sticks that Sienna had brought back from the ill-fated trip, one of the few things they'd managed to save. As she emptied the box, something clattered onto the floor. It wasn't charcoal. It was a phone, a cheap burner flip phone. Clara froze. She looked at Sienna. Sienna was engrossed in her painting, her back to Clara. Clara picked up the phone, her heart hammered against her ribs. Rule number 3, no cell phones. She flipped it open. There were no contacts saved, just a string of text messages to a single number. Clara. "We're going to the art store in Soho. Finally getting out. Unknown. That's great, babe. What time? Clara. Leaving in 20, wearing the blue dress. Unknown. Can't wait to see you. Be careful." Clara felt like she was going to be sick. The timestamp was 1 hour before the attack. Sienna hadn't been betrayed by a guard. Sienna had led the wolves to the door herself. Clara looked up to see Sienna turning around, wiping paint on a rag. Sienna saw the phone in Clara's hand. The color drained from her face so fast, she looked like a ghost. "Give me that," Sienna signed, her hands shaking. Clara took a step back. "Sienna, who is this?" Sienna lunged for the phone, but Clara held it out of reach. "It's just a friend," Sienna signed frantically. "He's an art student. I met him online before Father took my laptop. He's the only one who treats me like a normal person." "He asked for your location, Sienna." Clara signed back, her movements sharp and angry. "You told him where we were going, and then a brick came through the window with a death threat." Sienna stopped. She stared at Clara, the realization crashing down on her. No, Leo isn't. He's nice. He likes my paintings." "Leo?" Clara asked. "Leo who?" "Leo. O'Neill," Sienna signed weakly. Clara closed her eyes. O'Neill. O'Malley. It was the oldest trick in the book. The lonely princess and the charming stranger. "Sienna, you have to give me this phone. I have to take it to Kalen." "No!" Sienna screamed, a guttural, terrified sound. She grabbed Clara's arm. "If you tell them, my father will kill him. He'll kill Leo. Please, Clara, don't." "Leo tried to kill you," Clara shouted back, forgetting for a moment that Sienna couldn't hear the volume. She switched to signs, slashing the air. "He used you. He is the enemy. If you don't tell Kalen, I will." Sienna dissolved into tears, sliding down to the floor. "I just wanted to be loved," She sobbed in sign language, her movements sloppy with grief. Clara's heart broke, but she knew the stakes. She knelt down and hugged Sienna tight. I know, but we have to fix this. Clara stood up, gripping the phone. Stay here. She walked out of the room, straight into the lion's den. Clara found Kaylin in the security command center in the basement. The room was a wall of monitors, showing every angle of the estate. Kaylin looked up as she entered. He saw the phone in her hand and the look on her face. He didn't say a word. He just held out his hand. Clara placed the burner phone in his palm. Sienna, she whispered. She didn't know. She thought he was an art student. He catfished her. Kaylin flipped the phone open. He scrolled through the messages. His face turned into a mask of stone. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Leo, Kaylin read. Leo O'Malley, the youngest son. He looked at Clara. Does Sal know? No, Clara said. If Sal finds out, he won't just kill the boy. I don't know what he'll do to Sienna. He'll lock her in a padded room forever. Kaylin, please, we have to handle this without destroying her. Kaylin stared at the phone, his thumb hovering over the keypad. He was caught between his duty as an enforcer and his loyalty to the girl he had watched grow up. This is treason, Kaylin said softly. Technically, I should drag her downstairs and interrogate her. She's a victim. Clara stepped closer, grabbing his wrist. She's a lonely 22-year-old girl who wanted a boyfriend. Don't you dare treat her like a soldier. Kaylin looked down at Clara's hand on his wrist. He looked back into her eyes. The conflict in him was a physical storm. I can fix it, Kaylin said finally. I can use the phone, lure him out, make him think Sienna is meeting him. A trap, Clara realized. A solution, Kaylin corrected. But Sal needs to believe we found the leak elsewhere. If I do this, I'm lying to the Don. I'm risking my life to cover her mistake. Why would you do that? Clara asked. Kaylin stepped closer, crowding her against the console table. The monitors bathed them in a blue, flickering light. Because you asked me to, he said roughly. Clara's breath caught. And because, Kaylin continued, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper, I am tired of seeing her afraid, and I am tired of seeing you afraid. He reached out, his hand cupping Clara's cheek. His thumb brushed over her bottom lip. It was a rough, calloused touch, but incredibly gentle. Clara, he murmured. She didn't pull away. She leaned into his touch. Kaylin. He kissed her. It wasn't tentative. It was a collision. It was days of fear, adrenaline, and unspoken tension crashing together. Kaylin kissed her like he was going to war and might not come back. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling her flush against him. Clara wrapped her arms around his neck, holding on for dear life. It was messy, desperate, and perfect. They broke apart, chests heaving. Kaylin rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. I have to go, he whispered. I have to set the trap. Be careful, Clara said, her voice trembling. Go to Sienna. Keep her calm. Do not let her leave that room. He kissed her one last time, hard, quick, possessive, and then grabbed the burner phone and stormed out of the command center. Clara returned to the room to find Sienna sitting on the bed, staring at nothing. Did you tell him? Sienna signed, her face swollen from crying. Yes, Clara signed. Kaylin is going to handle it. He's not telling your father. Sienna let out a breath that was half sob. He's going to kill Leo, isn't he? Clara sat beside her. Leo tried to have us killed, Sienna. Kaylin is doing what he has to do. They sat in silence for an hour. The house was eerily quiet. Then, The door slammed open. It wasn't Kalen. It was Don Salvatore. He stood in the doorway, leaning heavily on a cane Clara hadn't seen him use before. His face was a terrifying shade of grey, sweat beading on his forehead. Behind him stood 2 guards Clara didn't recognize. "Sienna," Sal rasped. Sienna stood up, terrified. Sal hobbled into the room. He didn't look angry. He looked broken. "Come with me," he said. He looked at Clara. "You too. Translate." "Where are we going?" Clara asked, standing in front of Sienna instinctively. "The dining room," Sal said. "We have guests." They followed the Don down the grand staircase. The silence of the house felt wrong. Where was the usual hum of activity? Where was Kalen? When they entered the dining room, Clara stopped dead. Sitting at the long mahogany table was not the O'Malley family. It was the Giordano captains. 6 men, the inner circle. And at the head of the table, sitting in Sal's chair, was a man Clara had only seen in photos, Julian O'Malley, the head of the rival family. And standing behind him, a gun pressed to the back of Kalen's head, was one of Sal's own bodyguards. Kalen was on his knees. He had been beaten. His lip was split, blood dripping onto his tactical vest. But his eyes were wide, locked on Clara. "Run," Kalen mouthed. Sal laughed, a dry, wheezing sound. He limped to the side of the room. "You see, Sienna," Sal said, his voice trembling, not with fear, but with something else. "I didn't find the rat. The rat found me." Sal pointed a shaking finger at his own advisor, a man named Marcus, who was standing next to O'Malley pouring wine. "Marcus let them in," Sal said. "He sold the gate codes." Julian O'Malley smiled. He was a handsome man, in a serpent-like way. "Business is business, Sal. You're old. You're soft. You let a deaf girl run your heart." Julian looked at Sienna. "And Leo sends his regards, sweetheart. He said you were very easy to talk to." Sienna let out a silent scream. "So," Julian said, picking up a steak knife and twirling it. "Here is how this goes. Sal signs over the territories, or I shoot the interpreter. Then the dog," he nodded at Kalen, "and then I take the girl." Kalen's eyes met Clara's. There was no fear in them, only calculation. He shifted his weight slightly on his knees. "Duck," Clara signed to Sienna, moving her hand behind her back. Sienna saw it. "Well?" Julian asked. "Who goes first?" Sal straightened up. The grey look on his face vanished. He dropped the cane. He stood tall, the iron gavel once more. "You made one mistake, Julian," Sal said, his voice booming. "And what's that?" "You let my daughter see you." Sal looked at Sienna and nodded. Sienna didn't duck. She grabbed a heavy crystal decanter from the sideboard next to her and hurled it. Not at Julian. At the light fixture above the table. The chandelier shattered. The room plunged into semi-darkness. And in the chaos, Kalen moved. The dining room descended into a chaotic hellscape of strobe light violence. When Sienna shattered the chandelier, the heavy crystal fixture didn't fall completely, but it swung violently, smashing the bulbs and casting the room into a strobing, erratic darkness. Shadows danced wildly against the walls. For the hearing people in the room, the noise was disorienting. The crash of glass, the shouts of men, and the immediate, deafening boom of gunfire created a sensory overload. But for Sienna, the world remained perfectly, lethally silent. She didn't flinch at the noise. Her eyes adjusted instantly to the gloom. She saw the vibrations of the gunshots in the air. She saw the muzzle flashes illuminating faces in horrific detail. Kalen moved before the first shard of glass hit the table. He didn't try to stand up. Instead, he dropped flat, sweeping the legs of the guard standing behind him. The guard crumbled, his gun discharging wildly into the ceiling. Kalen was on him in a heartbeat, a blur of dark efficiency. There was a sickening crack, a sound Clara heard all too clearly, and Kalen rolled, coming up with the guard's weapon in his hand. "Get down!" Kalen roared, firing 2 shots into the chest of an approaching O'Malley soldier. Clara scrambled under the heavy oak table, dragging Sienna with her. "Stay down!" Clara screamed, though she knew Sienna couldn't hear her. She grabbed Sienna's face, forcing eye contact. "Stay. Here." Above them, the war for the Giordano Empire raged. Sal Giordano was not the frail old man he had pretended to be. He had kicked the table over, using it as a barricade. He was firing a snub-nosed revolver with calm, practiced precision. Marcus, the traitorous advisor, took a bullet to the shoulder and went down screaming, clutching the velvet drapes as he fell. Under the table, Clara's heart was beating so hard it felt like it was bruising her ribs. She looked at Sienna. Sienna wasn't crying anymore. She was watching the feet moving around them, analyzing. Suddenly, a hand reached under the table. Rough fingers grabbed Clara's ankle. She shrieked as she was dragged out across the Persian rug. It was Julian O'Malley. He hauled Clara up, wrapping an arm around her throat, using her as a human shield. He pressed the cold barrel of a pistol against her temple. "Stop!" Julian screamed. "Drop it, or the interpreter paints the wall." The gunfire ceased instantly. The room fell into a heavy, gasping silence. The air was thick with the smell of cordite and blood. Kalen stood 10 feet away. He was breathing hard, blood running down his chin from his split lip. His gun was leveled at Julian's head, but his finger hovered over the trigger. He couldn't take the shot. Clara was too small. Julian was too well hidden behind her. Sal stepped out from behind the overturned table. He looked weary, but his eyes were burning coals. "Let her go, Julian," Sal said calmly. "She's a civilian. This is between us." "She's leverage," Julian spat, backing toward the French doors leading to the terrace. "I'm walking out of here, and I'm taking her. You follow. She dies. You shoot. She dies." Clara clawed at Julian's arm, but his grip was like steel. She looked at Kalen. His eyes were wide, filled with a terrifying desperation she had never seen in him. The icy enforcer was gone. In his place was a man watching his world crumble. "Kalen!" Clara choked out. "Don't!" Kalen's hands were shaking. Just a fraction, but enough. He couldn't risk it. Julian grinned. "Smart dog, now back off." He took another step back. No one was looking at Sienna. She had crawled out from under the table on the opposite side. She was barefoot, moving silently over the broken glass and blood-stained carpet. She picked up a jagged shard of the crystal decanter she had thrown earlier. It was 6 inches long, sharp as a razor. Sienna locked eyes with Kalen. She didn't make a sound. She didn't wave. She just tapped her chest once. Kalen saw her. He didn't react. He didn't look at her. He kept his eyes locked on Julian, but his posture shifted imperceptibly. He understood. Sienna lunged. She didn't attack Julian. She attacked the environment. She slammed the crystal shard into the heavy velvet curtain rope next to the French doors, the rope holding back the heavy, floor-to-ceiling drapes. The knot severed. The heavy brocade curtains swooped down like a falling stage backdrop, engulfing Julian and Clara in a suffocating wave of heavy fabric. Julian shouted in confusion, blinded and tangled. "Now!" Clara screamed, dropping her weight and biting Julian's arm with everything she had. Julian howled and flinched, the gun moving away from her head. Bang. 1 shot. Kalen didn't miss. The bullet tore through the heavy curtain. Julian's body went rigid, then slumped backward, crashing through the glass of the French doors and onto the terrace stones outside. Clara scrambled out of the curtains, gasping for air. Kalen was there in a second. He dropped his gun and fell to his knees, grabbing her face, his hands covered in blood and sweat. "Clara!" he rasped, scanning her frantically. "Clara, look at me, are you hit?" "No," she sobbed, collapsing into him. I'm okay. He crushed her against his chest, burying his face in her neck. He was shaking violently now, the adrenaline crash hitting him like a freight train. "I thought I lost you. I thought—" Across the room, Sal Giordano walked over to the shattered window. He looked down at the body of his rival. Then he turned to his daughter. Sienna was standing amidst the wreckage of the dining room. Her dress was torn, her feet were bleeding from the glass, but she stood tall. Sal looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in 20 years. He didn't see a broken doll. He saw the woman who had just saved his empire. He walked over to her. He didn't hug her. He took her hand, brought it to his lips, and kissed her knuckles. Then, clumsily, his old fingers formed a shape. He pointed to her. Then he crossed his arms over his chest. Then he pointed to her again. "You. Brave. You." It was broken sign language. It was grammatically incorrect. But Sienna burst into tears. She threw her arms around her father's neck, and for the first time in the history of the Giordano family, the Don cried. The spring rain washed the blood off the terrace, but it took weeks to scrub the memory of violence from the estate. The power vacuum left by the O'Malleys and the subsequent police investigations meant the Giordano family had to go underground for a while. But inside the walls, the atmosphere had shifted. The air was lighter. The silence wasn't oppressive anymore. It was peaceful. Clara stood in the newly renovated sunroom, packing a box. "You don't have to go," a deep voice said from the doorway. Clara turned. Kalen was leaning against the frame. He wasn't wearing his tactical gear. He was wearing jeans and a soft grey sweater that made him look younger, less like a weapon, and more like a man. His arm was in a sling, a souvenir from the fight, but he looked good. "My contract is up," Clara said, taping the box shut. "Sienna doesn't need a full-time interpreter anymore. She has a new tutor, one she actually likes." "Sal is learning," Kalen noted, walking into the room. "He's up to 100 words. He told the underboss to eat dirt in ASL yesterday." Sienna laughed for an hour. Clara smiled. "She's going to Paris next month, isn't she?" "Yes," Kalen said, with a security detail, obviously, but a smaller one. "She's enrolled in the Sorbonne. She's free, Clara. You did that." "We did that," Clara corrected. Kalen stopped in front of her. The space between them was charged, filled with the memory of the kiss in the command center and the desperate embrace on the dining room floor. "And what about us?" Kalen asked quietly. Clara's breath hitched. "Us?" "I'm not good at words," Kalen admitted, looking down at his boots. "I break things. I hurt people. That's what I'm good at. But when you're here, I don't want to be that guy. I want to be the guy who buys the groceries, the guy who learns sign language." He looked up, his blue eyes vulnerable. "I checked your file again. Your brother, Toby. The facility in upstate." Clara stiffened. "What about him?" "I bought the building," Kalen said casually. Clara dropped the tape dispenser. You what?" "The care facility. The management was cutting corners. I didn't like it. So I bought it. It's under new management, better doctors, fully paid for, indefinitely." Clara stared at him, her mouth agape. "Kalen, you can't just buy a hospital because you like a girl." "I can," he shrugged. "It's a tax write-off. And I love the girl." The words hung in the sunlit room. Clara's eyes filled with tears. She bridged the gap between them, reaching up to cup his face. "You are crazy. You are absolutely a mobster lunatic." "Is that a yes?" Kaelin asked, leaning into her touch. To what? To staying, to giving a retired hitman a chance. Clara laughed, a wet, happy sound. I think my lease in Queens is up anyway. Kaelin kissed her. It wasn't desperate like the last time. It was slow, sweet, and full of promises. From the garden window, Sienna watched them. She was painting on an easel set up on the grass. The canvas was bright, yellows, greens, and soft blues. She saw Kaelin kiss Clara. She saw Clara laugh. Sienna smiled. She picked up her brush and signed to herself, a single word that encompassed everything she had found in the silence. Family. She turned back to her painting, dipping her brush in the gold paint. The cage was open. The birds were singing. And finally, everyone was listening. And that is how a simple interpreter walked into the lion's den and changed everything without firing a single shot. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the loudest people in the room are the ones who are heard the least, and true power comes from understanding, not fear. Sienna, Kaelin, and Clara found their voice in a world that wanted to silence them. But what about you? If you were in Clara's shoes, would you have taken the money and run, or would you have stayed to fight for Sienna? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of danger, romance, and redemption, please destroy that like button. Share this video with a friend who loves a good twist, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.